Some of the content covered may be graphic in nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Alright, so what I'm going to talk about today is the Eastern Airlines flight of 401. The start of this is it's a plane crash. On December 29th, 1972, this Eastern Airline flight 401 departed JFK Airport in New York and was heading for Miami. Well, the plane, the first part of the story is, routine. The plane started off, everything was routine, no issues. Well, there was pilot error. This was a pilot error situation where they inadvertently put the autopilot on, and it was the plane. It crashed. It actually crashed into the the Florida Everglades, and 101 people died. Okay, including the pilots, which were Bob Loft, who was the captain, the first officer Albert Stockstill, and the second officer Donald Repo. So they all perished immediately in the crash. There were some survivors due to the fact that the way the plane crashed, the Everglades kind of soaked up some of the impact, I guess you want to say. Whereas most planes just incinerate and blow up and there's nothing left to be found, millions of pieces, or in the ocean. This one actually did have some survivable parts to them. This plane went down. They did their investigation. They realized it was, just pilot error. It had to do with, them inadvertently putting the autopilot on and not realizing the plane was getting ready to crash. What the story here is about is what happened afterward. So Eastern Airlines, what they did was after the investigation, they actually, which I know they would never do such a thing nowadays, but in '72 maybe this was common practice to save money. They salvaged some of the parts of this plane. And I've heard things like a microwave oven was salvaged, some of the paneling that they were able to reuse, maybe some of the brackets that the seats were on, some parts of the interior that they were able to reuse, they did reuse on other TriStar planes in the Eastern Airlines fleet. So these parts were put into other planes and put into service. Okay. Well, soon after the accident, and they put these parts in these other planes, there were sightings of these pilots in the planes. Now, I know this is going to sound amazing here, but this is the truth. So basically what happened was there was even a book made by John G. Fuller. It was a 1976 book, and it was called The Ghost of Flight 401. He investigated allegations of people being on these flights, including some even an executive from Eastern that were going, on the flights going to wherever they were going, seeing weird things happening on this plane. At one point, a lady had seen a gentleman dressed in a captain's outfit sitting next to her. She basically stated that he looked sickly. He was like white, very white, and looked sickly. So she called over a flight attendant. And as the flight attendant came over and she looked over, the guy was completely gone, completely disappeared right in the seat. There was another situation where somebody saw the face of one of the other pilots in a microwave oven. They saw them like their face in the oven.
Like a reflection?
Like a reflection, and nobody was there behind her.
Wow.
It got so bad.
It would have been even more creepier. They opened it up and the head
was sitting in there.
In the microwave.
But yeah, it got so bad that there was even some situations where flights were delayed because when that lady had saw the image disappear, she went hysterical, and they actually had to delay the flight for 3 hours. There were other documented situations where people had saw things on these planes, and Eastern had to actually, this guy wrote this book, after his investigation, and Eastern threatened to sue him. The CEO, who was Frank Borman at the time of Eastern Airlines, considered suing the author of the book for libel. And Fuller basically made a point in the book that the executives were trying to cover up everything that was going on. The Eastern Airline executives were trying to, cover this up. Well, the lawsuit was dropped because Borman thought that it would give more publicity to Fuller's book, so he dropped the lawsuit. And then they did very quickly, though. It is documented that they removed all those parts out of those Eastern Airlines, though, a few years later, and they replaced it, and there was no other issues. There was even a situation where a plane, where I think it was the Loft, Mr. Loft, was seen talking to one of the pilots, telling him that, I'm going to save this, I'm going to make sure that nothing else happens again. And the guy didn't know who this was. He disappeared. And the plane, there was a malfunction with the plane that they were able to catch. And I don't remember, and I apologize, I don't remember what the malfunction was, but they virtually think maybe he saved a plane from going down, his ghost in one of those other planes. So it's a very strange situation. There was a song written about it. There was movies made about it in the late 70s, even the Ghost Flight of 401. So it got a lot of publicity in the 70s, and Eastern Airlines hated it. So there was something there that Eastern Airlines got to the point where, with them getting to the point where they were going to sue somebody over this, it makes you wonder what kind of truth there was to it. And there was an executive of Eastern Airlines that was on a flight that saw something as well. He saw one of the lieutenants walking down the aisle, and a lot of these people didn't even know who these three pilots were until they saw their photos later on, and they said, that's the guy that I saw. That was a person that I saw sitting next to me. So these people had nothing to make out of this. They weren't doing this for publicity themselves. They had a situation that they saw something that freaked them out.
That's such an old school way of doing things. Like, even with when we talked about the Kennedy car getting repurposed, right. It's just it's a weird nowadays, because people will just buy new, buy new. Right. Think about how often you replace things, right, versus just reusing it or repurposing.
And an airline, they have the money, they have deep pockets, they can afford that.
Clearly, Eastern did not if they closed in 91.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
But
the thing is, it brings us back to, you hear about if something's haunted, a house is haunted or something, but there also is something to be said about an item being haunted.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Like whether it's a vase or a treasure chest or whatever.
So these were put into multiple planes.
They were put into about 6 planes, I believe.
So it wasn't just one plane.
Nope. The salvage parts were put in, I believe, 6 other TriStar, very similar planes to the one that went down.
So this is all documented on multiple flights as well.
Correct.
Not just one.
It was on multiple flights, yes. That's what made it so, and that's why he got to the point where the CEO had to do something, and that's why they threatened to sue this guy, because he investigated and talked to a lot of people that were involved with this, that saw these hauntings.
Did the ghosts get to ride for free?
Yes, they did. That's right. They got first. They rode in first class.
Yeah, that's crazy. I've heard of other situations too where items being haunted. There was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries decades ago, but where this family brought a bunk bed home, and for months after, they were tortured by this entity to the point where they would see strange apparitions. This guy pulled into his driveway and he saw his house was on fire.
Wow.
And then he did a double take and it was fine, but just being taunted by an entity. So I think it's very plausible that things can be attached to items as just as well as who's to say a house is an item? So right. It's.
And the thing is, if there was nothing to it, then why did Eastern Airlines eventually, a couple years later, go into all those planes and pull those parts out? That's what you have to ask yourself.
They would have never done anything with that.
They wouldn't have cared. They would have said, screw it. This is just garbage. We're not. And they said it was garbage, but they went back and they also took those parts out.
Back like what you're saying about haunted items. You can look up that stuff. Have you ever heard of the doll Annabelle?
Yes.
So that's actually in
that movie that came out.
I don't know. Was it? I don't know if
It's a
it was
movie.
Yeah,
Is
they
it?
just
I didn't
came out
know
with a
that.
movie.
Based
this
on
year.
a true story.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
That was
yeah.
in the Demonology Museum, and I don't remember the couple's name.
Warren.
Yes. Yeah. That's who it is. And
Warren.
then there's actually like the Divic box. Have you guys heard about that?
No, I didn't hear about that.
It's like a haunted box that basically gets passed on eBay, and people basically it's causing you all kinds of bad luck. But it's one of those things where people just sell it saying this thing's haunted,
Right.
and then everyone, of course, now is like, no, it's not, and then they buy it, and then they have terrible luck, and then it gets passed
Keep
on.
that thing
passed
the
on.
fuck
Yeah.
away from me.
Why would you sell it? Why wouldn't you?
I already
just
got
bury
enough
it?
bad luck. Well, that's it for this week's episode. If you like what you saw, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. I'm John Budzinski. From The Mistake on the Lake, this is Type 3 TV. Over and out.